now.
Today we have Sean Casey here from MIS. Hi, Sean.
Hi, Sean.
Okay, and we'll have a transcript. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I keep forgetting that it's being broadcast somewhere else. Thanks for that reminder. And before we start with the minutes and then jump into the agenda, are there any other changes or additions to the agenda that anyone would like to propose? We figure out how to slot that in.
David, it's Steve Powers. As I mentioned, I suggest that we consider officially electing a chair. I don't think we've done that yet.
Yeah, and I think a vice chair too would be helpful. If
I could just say, the chair was established and appointed by the Board of Supervisors, David Newman, for the task force. It's a point of order.
Right. I guess that's not really within our powers to do that.
Okay.
It has to be the board. But
No problem.
I'll just speak to it. You know, I envision doing this for a while and then transitioning. I don't want to do this as kind of a lifetime appointment. I think it's great if we as an organization can rotate through some of those roles over time. So I'm thinking of maybe a two year period or something like that. But that we can discuss later on, and when we're ready to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors for a change, we can vote on that as a group. So any other comments on the agenda before we jump in? Great. So we have two meetings. One is from our full meeting on April 29th, which I emailed out, and the other is the short meeting on May 11th to discuss the summer intern. And Alejandra is on the call with us, by the way, so we will introduce her in a minute. And thanks for joining us, Alejandra, now and also for the summer. And thank you to the supervisors who expedited the approval to get that done. That was not easy, and really appreciate that action. But do we have a motion to any comments on the minutes first? Any changes, and then do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Steve, again, the one question I had was, what is the commitment, financial commitment there? It looked like it was 35,000. I thought it was more than that.
Yeah, I might have missed that. It's a total of 85,000 per year, but renewable for the second year. So it's not a commitment for the 2 years. It will be renewed if we execute well for the second year. So it's 85,000 a year. 50 of that is being committed by CLC, and 35 is being committed by, they've changed their name. They were Lifeboats HV, and now they're Partners for Climate Action, Hudson Valley. And that is a project that's fiscally sponsored by the New World Foundation. So that's where the funding comes from. We will make that clearer in the minutes.
Okay.
So with that clarification, are there any other comments on the minutes? And I'll do that after the meeting. And Maureen, I don't know if you caught all that, but I touch base with you afterwards.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I don't know if you caught that that nuance about the funding for the minutes, but I
did. I have it written down. I can make that change and I'll send it out. Did you want to go ahead and approve the minutes with that change now, or wait?
I'm comfortable approving the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Great.
I'll second it.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Minutes are approved. Thank you all. So Alejandra Limon is a public policy grad student at Cornell, and she is focused on, among other things, climate smart initiatives, and was introduced to us about a month ago looking for an opportunity like this to assist in the Climate Smart Communities project at a municipal level. And we had Tistria, Steve Powers, and Mark, her colleague from the program, who also has been instrumental in New Lebanon in helping them achieve bronze status. We also met with her supervisor, her professor, who oversees students doing these types of municipalities. A very productive call, and I'll let the others who are on it speak to it. But I just wanted to take, and in a minute we will get to the scope of work, which we'll discuss for the summer, and then we'd like to put that forward to the Board of Supervisors for approval. But we believe there's room in there for Alejandra to get started before that approval comes through, because some of the work, as you'll see, is really collecting information and looking at historical things that we've done. There's not a launch of a new initiative that will compel any kind of use of funds that we're envisioning this summer. It's a lot of organizing ourselves, scoping, and planning. But we'll get to that in a minute. I want to go through our broader discussion about task force priorities and look at the Climate Smart and spend a good part of the next hour.
David, could I interrupt
Yes.
for one minute? Correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is the Board of Supervisors has already approved Alejandra. We provided a scope of work, which is what the chairman had asked for. I don't think anything needs to go back to the Board of Supervisors, because you're not talking until July that would happen, and she's almost through her internship at that point.
Right.
My understanding is that she's been approved. As long as there's no expenditures, we submitted a scope of work with the approval. The board approved it. So at this point, scope of work that was approved, and then come July's full board meeting, if there's changes, we can certainly discuss that or additions. But my understanding is there is no scope of work that needs to go back to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, that's fine.
There is a HR component that she has to reach out to you offline, but that does need to be accomplished before she starts, or when she starts. Okay.
And the dates that we're to the group to put you on the spot, but we'd appreciate that.
Yes. No, don't worry. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be joining today to your call. And thank you for the opportunity. Feel free to ask any question or email me. I'll be supporting Steve, David, and Tristia. And yeah, we already have like a planning of what we're going to do. And yeah, looking forward to that. Thank you so much, David.
Great. You're welcome. Thank you. And we will be convening a weekly meeting with Alejandra on Friday mornings. Steve and Tistria and I will be meeting with her on a weekly basis to assist her and keep things on track, and then also to comply with the requirement to provide feedback to her supervisor as necessary. So that is very exciting, and we're really happy that we're going to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. So thanks for everyone for making that happen. As I said, we'll get to the scope of work of what we submitted to the board for Alejandra, and it's very consistent with what we've been discussing, and so it won't be a surprise. But let's first start with, unless there are any other comments or questions for Alejandra, let me pause with that. If there are, please interrupt me. But what I'd like to do, if not, is get into a discussion on task force priorities. And this is kind of a blue sky. There's no wrong answer. There's no right answer. But we'd really like to hear from folks, and really everyone, about what they think. I'm not going to call on people and go around the room. But if folks can speak to, over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, maybe a little longer if the conversation's going well, speak to what they think are suitable priorities for us to be considering as we develop more of a broader scope of work for the task force more generally, as opposed to the initial work we'll be doing kind of this summer preliminarily. So I'll open the floor. Mike?
Yeah, David, I went through the Climate Smart Actions on their website and picked out 16 actions which I felt deserved our attention because they are, relatively speaking, either things that we have already fully completed or that we are on our way to complete, as well as things that have a strategic value that will apply to other actions which depend on having completed those. So the point value is varying, of course, with some of them depending on how deeply you get into that action. But that's another factor here. So among them, of course, we've already created the task force, and then partnership with other entities, I think, will be in the region as we, as a county, link with some of the towns in some actions that will affect at both levels. A county operation, government operations greenhouse gas inventory, which should be pretty straightforward there. It just amounts to a paperwork exercise of what sort of things are we doing, our buildings and so forth, which of course goes along with government building energy audits. And I think that's already been done, if I understand Supervisor Knott's comments a couple of meetings ago. And benchmarking of the municipal buildings is then the natural follow-on to the energy audits, which is again a kind of clerical exercise to use the EPA's benchmarking tool to put all of those numbers into the system, which you can then compare year over year when you feel like you're getting something done. Fleet inventory, also pretty straightforward, and it gets you 4 points. And recycling bins in government buildings ought to be easy if we don't have one already. The construction and demolition waste policy, and the culvert and dam inventory, if that hasn't been done already. One of the other things that has been done, but which I think we haven't publicized quite enough, is PACE financing, where businesses, especially get energy efficiency improvement and alternative energy financing, essentially through the county at no expense to the county. So that's part of my take on this, and I'll write it up and pass it around. But that's my feeling about it.
That's great. That's really helpful. And thank you for taking the time to write it up. And I'll synthesize all of this information. We'll have the minutes, of course, but we'll want a working document of priorities that we can then turn into a scope of work. And I know that some people on the call here have done this at their town level. I haven't. So, if there are suggestions for not just the content and the substance, but the structure, the framework, we don't have to get into that now, but that would be great if you want to just reach out directly and help us with that. So any other comments on Michael's comments or other ideas? One thing I'll add while people are thinking and lining up, the greenhouse gas inventory is something that I had originally, early on thought that that's really a logical place to start. And the way it's structured, you can do a more comprehensive community-based greenhouse gas inventory, which would capture really all of the emissions in the county that are governmental and private sector. And that's obviously a lot more work. Or you can limit it to just a government operations inventory, which is what Michael, I think, was referring to. And so there are different scales at which we could take that on. And there are contractors that we can work with standardized inventories is one of them that is based, I think, I don't know where they're based, but they have someone in Kingston who I've spoken with about this. And it's not very expensive in terms of the setup and the software and setting up the system to enter the information. It's the work comes, I think, with the data collection and linking up with all of the various entities, in this case at the county level, who we would need to gather information from. So there's kind of a participatory requirement with regard to our colleagues in the county government who are managing various aspects of the county government operations. And we would hope we could help facilitate the collection of information and get everyone's cooperation to do that if we decide to go down that path. But just to make that point clear, any other comments on those actions or others?
Yeah, David. Yeah. I was going to weigh in. I'm a member of a cohort group that was actually it's funded by what used to be Lifeboats HV that just changed their name. But the idea is we are getting kind of a training in being climate smart coordinators. There's 6 of us around the Hudson Valley. And as part of that, we have a connection, each of us, with an intern from Cornell Cooperative Extension. In my case, it's a woman named Kelsey Jean West, who's been really invaluable in kind of steering us through all this process. Myself and our COPAIG task force, we actually have had 4 meetings with her now. 3 of those were simply going through those, I think, 150 possible actions, which is kind of a long process, but it turned out to be well worth it. The 4th meeting, we actually put together a list that we all could live with, which I haven't run through our town board yet, but that'll be the next step. But just kind of echo what Michael said. Well, actually, the basic thinking for us was look for the low-hanging fruit was the term that Kelsey used, meaning in many cases, you're going to find when you look at those actions that they have already been done and simply need to be documented. For instance, there's solar panels on the roof of our town hall. That's you get points for that. And there are other, so our list for things like, kind of like what Michael said too, things like fleet efficiency policies, recycling actions, energy code enforcement training. The GHG inventory came up too, that are relatively simple to do, or in some cases just need to be documented. The other one that really jumped out, which I should pass along to everyone, is this stretch code. That is an energy efficiency code, which would basically cover any new town buildings. The discussion was that it's potentially a little bit of a push, in a lot of towns because, as we're all aware, people can bridle at the thought of more, rules and regulations being put on the building process. But another part of that is it's probably going to be mandated by New York State in the future anyway. And it also comes, if you get it done within this calendar year, I think it comes with a $5,000 grant. So there's money to the towns to be had because New York State is really pushing this. So that was another thing we were really thinking about exploring was the stretch code. Yeah, and that's our general overview of the whole process. And I'd be happy to pass along our list that came out of those 4 meetings. Might be helpful for a lot of people. With the caveat that the other thing that we kind of had as a guiding principle was that these lists are going to be different for every town. So, every town has got its different priorities and its different needs. So what might work for COPAIG might not work for a different town. But But there are certain things that seem to be relatively straightforward that you might want to get started. We might want to get started with. So thanks.
John. You're
pushing the wrong button. Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Dan. And also, Michael, I think those are valuable. A couple of thoughts I had on this. And since we're fairly new and getting started at the town level in Clover, and one of the things that I see could happen is that when we hire a staff person, that they get, we're in a rush to reach bronze. And so we do a lot of data crunching. And there's a balance between rushing to get to bronze and accomplish these things, and some of the less, maybe accountable objectives. And certainly one of the main things that we were interested in the earlier discussions with the towns, and how do we encourage processes where we're sharing. And for example, Dan raised the stretch code, and I've been looking into stretch code, and I know Philmont has been doing that, and that involves a good bit of work. But I think there's valuable things to share. One of the problems there, of course, is educating the town and the staff so that people understand. But finding these subgroups and having the coordinator spend, or somebody at the spending some time supporting that partnership process, I think is something that we need to not keep in mind. The other thing that I wanted to just sort of throw out is that I don't think there's a very good understanding of what Climate Smart program is and how that affects every local town. And certainly every time you talk to somebody in the town, my experience is you're spending a lot of time trying to educate them. And I think it's important that we try to find ways of helping people, not only in our towns, but also in the county. It's going to be huge because there's so many employees and there's so much potential. So although we don't want to draw on a lot of resources, say, of the county, but there will be real value in finding ways of helping county employees, especially in the management level, understand the opportunities and how we move ahead with that. And that could be a really critical factor in multiplying the value of having a coordinator and other policy decisions that we make. So those are a couple of things that I just wanted to throw out just to complicate it.
Thank you, John. Tistria, and then we have a comment in the chat, which I'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, so stretch wouldn't be a county thing because each town does their own code. So each town could certainly adopt that, but nobody goes to the county for a building permit. They go to the town that they live in. I'm going to make kind of a disclaimer overall, and this is just my personal opinion, and I might be in the minority, which is perfectly fine. I think we really need to make sure that we're focused on things that offer options for people and offer education to encourage people, but do not move in any direction that forces people to do things. So things like the stretch, for me personally here in New Lebanon, was a no-go. Things like aggregate, where it opts everyone in, and then we have a bunch of senior citizens who feel like they've been duped and have no idea how to opt out. I personally am against any of those types of programs. I feel very strongly, especially in a community like Columbia County, that we want to put a positive image out to the community. We want people to be excited about the county becoming climate smart. And I think that if you take any of the actions that either require, like the stretch requires people to spend more money, or requires them to opt into solar. I just think we should, as a general principle, avoid those things. Here in New Lebanon, we went from a lot of skepticism about the Climate Smart program to a very wonderful acceptance of it. People are excited because we gave them free bicycles and we gave them free clothing and we gave them the option to do community solar, in which case they would save 10% on their energy bill if they so decided to do so. So we really focused a strong focus on not any of the actions that became requirements or kind of shoved climate smart things down people's throats, so to speak. And we really focused on things that were bipartisan, that could be beneficial to everyone. And I have watched in a short time, in less than a year, community members that were like, another climate initiative, another requirement, the government's going to tell us what to do. And now those people are some of our biggest cheerleaders, talking about, wow, we needed a bike and we got a free bike. And, you know, we now save money on our energy bill because the Climate Smart Task Force educated us about an option that we decided to take advantage of. So that's kind of my overall disclaimer. Again, I might be the minority in the room, but I think it's really important that we focus on things that support and educate and encourage, and we don't go in any direction that forces. So some of the things that I would love to see the county focus on are things like a bike recycling program. It has been so hugely successful in New Lebanon. We have given out, I don't have the exact number, but I would say at least 100, if not more. I think we've given out already like 30 since we started it up again in the spring. That's something that I could easily see as a countywide thing where each town could, you know, have their own mechanics, and we could have a coordinated campaign across the county where, you know, regardless of what town you live in, and if your town doesn't have a climate smart group, then the bike comes from a different town, that countywide we could easily have something like that without a heavy lift. It keeps things out of the landfill. It supports the environment. And similar with the free store, when I ran for assembly and I talked about the free store that I had started as the town clerk, so many people were like, oh my God, we want one in our town. Can you do one countywide? And so I think there's a lot of, for me, a lot of focus there because I want to focus on community support. And then the EV charging stations is another one that I think would be great to focus on. So if I had to pick my top three, it would be bike recycling, some sort of free store, which if anyone doesn't know the free store, people donate, you know, clothing and shoes. If you had a big enough space, you could do housewares and furniture. It's all for free. And then volunteers sort and organize it, and anybody can come and take whatever they need free of charge. And then composting, I think, is another kind of easy lift. If the county, if Jolene and her department were open to it, you know, maybe we could have composting stations at all of our county waste sites where people are going anyway with their garbage and recycling. They could also bring their composting. We could then connect with, you know, local farms and provide good soil. I think some counties and towns even then sell the compost and make some revenue off of it. So once they've taken the time to process it and make it ready to go in a garden, you then go to your local dump and you buy a 10-pound, you know, container of compost for your garden. So those would be my top: composting, bike recycling, free store, and EV charging stations. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to keep this going. This is a great discussion, but I just wanted to interject. It sounded like the development of a list of criteria that you mentioned some, and I was taking notes that we could develop to help us scope out which actions make sense. And you know, please feel free to comment on whether we want to consider and use that as a lens to evaluate these actions. And what I gathered is we want to avoid things that will lead to unfunded mandates, and this I personally agree with. We don't want to compel people to have to spend money. The actions that provide benefits to either the county government or to individuals directly, visible benefits that are more direct. I mean, these are all beneficial. Things that are applicable to the county, so some things aren't, and they clearly wouldn't be something we would achievable within a certain period of time, perhaps 2 to 3 years or maybe longer. A path toward funding, so there's not something that we want to do, but we have no idea how we're ever going to pay for it. There's at least an idea, a concept for how we could raise funds for it. And support education and encourage outreach. Those are just some ideas that come to mind. I think they're good guiding principles, if not criteria. So who's next? Who would like to speak to any of that or add their other ideas? And while you're thinking, I'll just kind of ping folks on some of the other areas that we haven't really talked about. That includes waste management. It came up with composting, and there are other issues as well. I'm not sure if Jolene is on the call or not. I don't think she is. I think she had was on vacation. But please tell me if I'm wrong. Land use and then community resilience to climate change. And I was curious from a government standpoint, it has to do with planning, resilience. There's one hazard mitigation, things like cooling centers, watershed-based flood plans, things that I would imagine are on the minds of the Board of Supervisors anyway, and are part of design flood elevation flood maps. These are types of culverts and dams. So I'm just kind of throwing those out because I think those should be our top priorities, but just to make sure we get a discussion of other things that are out there among the 100 some odd actions. Supervisor Knott.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to echo on John's comments on the fact that we had heard from the state a while ago that, there are challenges to the county achieving some of the gold or bronze statuses, and I don't want to get wrapped up in just trying to achieve those statuses and lose track of actually getting something done that we can get done. So I do appreciate those comments. There are a lot of things going on in county government, and we do need to continue to document that we can earn ourselves some points that way. But I think this group can be a great resource to a lot of the towns that can actually do better, smaller projects in their towns. And as Tishri had talked on, some of these things are only available to towns. So let's keep focused on trying to help other town climate smart groups work. Tishri had talked about some of her priorities, and I wanted to say that after our last meeting, I did meet with Ron Senf and looked at a number of different locations county-wide where we could have charging stations. And I wanted this group to follow up on the concept of trying to develop where there's a need. The best place that I looked at with this developer would be at our DSS parking lot at Railroad Avenue in the city of Hudson. We could there have charging stations that would operate as a fleet for the county vehicles in the evening and then be open to the public during the day when the fleet cars are out. So I do have a cost analysis for that and bringing that to some other committees. But we would like to identify within the city of Hudson anyway where there is a need for more of them. So good work though. Thank you.
Hey, Supervisor Knott, can I ask a question on that? So let's say that was one of the things that this committee wanted to get to work on. Would we need to go to the Board of Supervisors first to get permission, or would we work on a proposal, work on presentation, work on what grants are available, and then go to the board saying, this is where we want to put them, here are the grants that are available, and we want authorization to apply for the grant funding?
So I have all that information, and I can share it with you for this committee. Ron did give me a couple different proposals for a couple different locations we looked at. I did share it with Jim Guzzi because he's looking at the idea. We don't have any fleet cars right now that are electric-based fleet cars, but we're looking at that. So we needed to know what the county would have to spend in infrastructure in order to be able to have those and when we could do it. That becomes the next part of it, when we could get this all done. But yeah, so I think this committee could say, we support this initiative, and we would then take it to county government, or that we can go through county government from this committee with that proposal. I was going to kind of send it through Public Works as well too, or Finance, because of the car end of it, so. Does that help or confuse you?
That's
no, that helps. Thank you. I mean, ideally, I'd love to like make that motion today and have that be one of the projects. If we all agree that EV charging stations are a good thing, have that be one of the projects that we get approval from the board to kind of move forward on. And especially Alejandra being here to help us, you know, she could help us get the grant funding, apply for it, all of that. I just didn't know what process, what approval we needed from the board to kind of move forward.
Yeah, we would need, so we've got a proposal that we need to get to the Board of Supervisors through one committee or the other, and then send it through there. But that, Ron's company, it seemed like they were doing the grant work and stuff like that, but I'd like to ask some more questions on that. But.
Yeah, they will do some of that work, and that's part of their role. That's plug-in stations online. That's Ron Semp, who spoke to us at the last meeting. Supervisor Knott is referring to. We also discussed, and I'm eager to pursue that as well, or at least support it in any way. It sounds like it's a train that's leaving the station either way, which is really exciting. But if there's any way we can add value to that or support it in any way, we should talk about how we can do that. If you need assistance, Supervisor Knott, what you think the group here could do. And one thing that comes to mind that we have discussed is this gap analysis at Hudson, but I'd like to see a broad county-wide analysis of our current map of stations and in consultation with some experts at our disposal, what would be a reasonable projection of demand going forward in the next decade or so, trying to front load the development of those stations while, as Ron Semp made clear, while we have access to some of the funding that is likely to probably diminish as at a certain saturation point of EV charging, or as the private sector kind of is incentivized to take over a lot of that, and these incentives will go away. So that's one thing that comes to mind. But how can we? Well, let's linger on this for a moment. How can we be helpful as a task force to what you're already doing?
So I think the help could come into identifying, and we just stick within the city of Hudson right now and say, you know, where is the biggest need, and you know, is this location a need? Could we get other people to use it? I mean, other than the county using it for fleet cars in the daytime, how many people do we think would be visiting DSS and need to be able to plug into these, and so that we can find out, where is there a need for people to be able to access a public charging station, I guess would be part of the criteria.
So Ron, my question is there, so DSS is a little bit of a walk to Warren Street. So part of like when New Lebanon put ours in, like people will actually map their route out based on where these charging stations are. So somebody that's going from Rhinebeck to New Lebanon might take the Taconic, but if they have an EV car and there's a station in Hudson, they very well might take that route and then spend 2 hours walking around Warren Street and spending their money in Hudson. Is there a county property like that parking lot by DMV where I don't know if the farmer's market, anyway, is there a property that's closer to Warren Street? Not that DSS is far, but I think it's like 4 or 5 blocks that would actually bring the people who are charging because they're tourists coming through. It would bring them right to that kind of downtown shopping area.
So to answer that, what I tried to focus on, because as you probably are aware, if we put up if we were to have a fleet of county cars and we want to put in fleet charging stations for our own use, we could get 50% reimbursement. If we can make them available to the public, we can get 90% reimbursement for a lot of the project. So when I realized that there might be an opportunity to be able to achieve both, so that it gave the county an opportunity to start with a few fleet cars and see how that works, that became interesting to me. And the DSS became the easier parking lot to do that at. The 560 Warren Street parking lot, that was my first choice. I wasn't quite aware of how much power we actually need to run a number of these things. So getting that infrastructure there would take a little bit of work with Niagara Mohawk planners to see how we could get that. I looked at a building in the corner with power, but it only had 100 amp service, and they told me we'd need to have at least a 200 amp service to power a number of these things. So that's not out of the question, but I think that would be a location for public only access, not that the county could plug fleet cars into them. And again, I don't know if the county was to make an investment like that, and even if you were to give up, 3 or 4 parking spaces in that parking lot for these cars, would they get used? That's a question that we all know this is coming, it's going to grow. But right now, what is the need and where do we put the infrastructure? I think there's some just down the street from that parking lot, Ron had told me. So again, our assessment that David had talked about doing countywide is a great idea. Right now, I think we should focus a little bit because that's where we might have the opportunity to do a county one. Where would we do that?
So would it make sense, Ron, just to try and get the energy behind it for this committee to make a motion supporting, the efforts of an EV charging, grant and installation to start with in Hudson, and then when it went to what we did in New Lebanon was we had one quote, which it sounds like you have from plug-in stations. The town board approved applying for the grant. We applied for the grant. We got it. And then we had to go out to bid, which, plug-in stations could be one of the ones that bids. New Lebanon, we ended up with LilyPad, and they were great too. So would it be too soon at the June subcommittee meetings to get in front of the full board for July? Because this funding is available right now to have the motion that the full board approves be that, according to the quote that we have approval to then apply for the grant funding, at which point per our procurement policy. But typically, like in New Lebanon, we didn't go out to bid until after we got the grant. Would that be an appropriate process, and would that be a doable timeline?
So it is, but I think 2 things. The quote I got from plug-in stations, Ron Semp tells me that can fall under a state bidding process, so we don't have to go out to bid necessarily. I haven't run that through the controller's office yet. I did share the quote with our controller, but I haven't talked to it. But I think the bigger question is, simultaneously we're looking at, can we have some fleet cars? And I know that there's been some money just recently been made for that, but as you know, even in fleet cars, they're 50% more than a gas operated thing. So where does the cost come into? So Jimmy Guzzi was working with Enterprise, our rent-a-car company that we have a contract with, to see what we could do and see what grant money can be applied to that. Again, a resolution from this committee saying that we'd like to see the county have some fleet cars is a good thing. The exact dollars of it have to be worked out through that committee.
Yeah, and I do know some of the grants I looked into, they'll cover the difference in cost. So if we were going to buy 10 cars and it was going to cost us $300,000, and to get them as EV is going to be $600,000, the grant would cover that other 3. So we would still spend what we were going to spend anyway. That was the grant that I saw. And that might be a place that this committee, with all of their expertise, could be really helpful to work with both you and Supervisor Guzzi to research those grants and apply for them. And yeah, I'll let other people speak, but I'm happy to make that motion when it's appropriate to both support the EV charging station process and the fleet car process.
David?
Yes, Bill.
Just a follow-up, I agree with history about the charging stations, but I also see there's money available through DEC for private companies or public companies, whatever, to install charging stations on their locations. And could the Economic Development Council get involved with the businesses, say like in Hudson, Ron, or anywhere else in the county?
So you're talking about supporting grant money to send to, say, a gas station to add charging stations, or private businesses to do that?
Gas station, restaurants, or shopping centers sort of set up in Greenport?
Yeah, I don't know enough about that. I'm sure that that's being worked on out there, and we could find out some information about it, but I don't know enough about that. this moment in time.
Yeah.
That's what New Lebanon did. There's an easement that you have to get the property owner to enter into, a 10-year easement, so that they can't, sell it and then be like, oh, we don't want this here anymore. You need to move it. So if you're using the grant funding to install the EV charging station on property that the county doesn't own, there's just an easement process. And we learned the hard way in New Lebanon, it cannot have a mortgage on it. The business owner has to own the property outright.
Well, I was talking about there's funding available that DEC's advertised for businesses to put in their own, so they would own it. I wouldn't be a matter of the government being involved at all. I just, we have the economic development deals with businesses all around the county. So if they were to put out that information and see if people are interested, then it might pick up, because the money is there again, just like the grants are.
That's a great idea. Can you send that to me and I'll send it on to Mike Tucker?
Great. And I don't know if anyone in the DRI in Hudson, I'm not, the downtown revitalization grant that was given from the state, $10 million a couple of years ago. There's a process that is somewhat opaque to me, and I don't know if I've been following that, but I wonder if that's an opportunity to access some matching funds or some additional funds. No?
I don't think so. That's all been spoken for.
All right. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously moving forward, and I think if we can provide some support by simply passing a resolution saying that we are in favor of the expansion of the EV charging network and the county government moving toward an electric fleet, that would be great. That's more symbolic than anything else, but if that's helpful, that would be great. I also feel like there's an opportunity for us to provide some more tangible support in researching some of the grant opportunities that are out there for this, and giving you a little backstop there, Ron, on the work that you're already doing.
If the committee could just give us some feedback on where they, if we can, I don't know how we generate this information, but if we could make a determination as to how many people might use this during the day and what the revenue stream could be from having a charging station,
Well, I wonder if I don't know how you would develop that information, but I wonder if either the town or the city government has information on traffic flows or pedestrian, visits, or if there's a tourism bureau that might have some information, or the CDC might have some of this information. It's more data on, people moving around, and then some sort of assessment, I'm guessing here, some sort of assessment what type of percentage of cars are electric moving through here. Tistria, do you have experience with this or knowledge about how to do any of this?
I just know that any of the EV charging stations that already exist, I think Ron said there was one in downtown Hudson. Part of what you pay for is a data tracking system. So if we can figure out who owns or manage charging stations in or around Hudson, we can certainly get a picture of how often they're being used. It'll even tell you what zip code the person came from to know, is it like local Hudson people using it, or is it people coming from New Jersey? That might be a good indication. And also, if we're showing that there's one in Hudson and it's always full, then we're showing that there's another need. If we're showing that there's one already in downtown Hudson and it's twice a week, then we might be like, well, there and it's not being used. Let's just focus on the county fleet.
That makes good sense. Michael?
Okay. Yeah, the city-owned parking lot, which is right behind City Hall on the next block from the 560 lot, is equipped with 6 charging ports. And the city owns this. They got them installed under a grant program last year. And so the city will have the data associated with that system. and I'm sure would be happy to share it.
Michael,
Yeah, I
would you
think
mind reaching out to Mayor Johnson's office and seeing if you can get that data?
Now, the other thing about these systems is that this is a chicken and the egg kind of phenomenon, that you need to have the charging stations so that it generates a visit to that spot, that parking lot, in order to measure the effectiveness of it. So it's kind of an educated guess that in the largest city-owned parking lot that had excellent access to higher voltage electricity because there's already lighting there and so forth, that the factors added up to this being probably a good place. And then adding to it, of course, will be effective signage that tells somebody turn left here in order to get to the charging system. So it's almost like a marketing campaign that the county or any other municipality that gets into this would need to participate in, which is to say, where would we think the benefit would be, how close it is to the shopping areas and so forth, rather than existing data.
Right. Yeah, there's two maybe analyses. There's like a retrospective looking at historic use, current use, and then there's more of a planning function looking at what projected use we expect in the future and trying to meet that need.
Right. I mean, it's early days for the industry, but we can see in the statistics of the car manufacturers, all of the major car manufacturers have either a car on the road or on the in the planning stages. So the growth in usage of this kind of vehicle is going to go up, and probably by quite a bit, with incentives from New York State and on the federal government. So I think it's worth the time and energy to help figure these things out.
Yeah, and there's an economic development component mentioned before,
Yep.
And other aspects to that too, which are real values to the county. There are some comments in the chat. Tistria, did you have another comment on this conversation first?
I'd actually like to make a motion and see where it goes. I would like to move that the Climate Smart Task Force fully supports and endorses the expansion and installation of EV charging stations in the County of Columbia, as well as the implementation of electric vehicle fleets for county purposes, and that we offer our support and work for any of the administrative work, such as grant application, research, promotion, or any other way that we can be helpful to the county in these efforts.
I'll second that.
Great. Thank you. Any comments? So the task force, I didn't get every word, but fully supports expansion infrastructure in Columbia County, and specifically in this and EV fleets, and that the task force offers its support in research, data collection, outreach, and any other capacity to support the county. That basically capture it?
That's it. Yep.
And we'll obviously, that's what we're going to vote on in a moment. And do we have any comments? Great. I think we vote on this, and we can send this off in support. Okay. Supervisor Knott, thank you. He's got to join another conversation, but let's continue this offline. Great. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. We just passed our first substantive resolution as a task force. That's exciting. And we've got, I think as we shift this discussion in a moment to Alejandra's scope of work, it's good that we've been having this discussion. We can shape that according to the needs of the work that Ron is already doing and some of the other ideas that have been generated here to collect data and do an analysis of current demand, that type of thing. Before we shift gears, we have this broader discussion. Oh, Steve, your hand's up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that it seems, just listening to the comments of others so far, a lot of the programs that are being proposed are part of the Clean Energy Communities program. And Clean Energy Communities, or if you look on the CSC action checklist, they're indicated as CEC on the right-hand side. If we, as a county, achieve 4 of those items, we'll get grant money from them. And that includes energy benchmarking for government buildings, clean energy upgrades, advanced vehicles, LED streetlights, also energy enforcement training, and also community solar are in there. We just completed 4, and a lot of that was started by Tistria when she was town clerk. For New Lebanon, we got $5,000. It's actually, I think it's 10,000, if I'm not wrong, at the county level. So it would be great to concentrate on them, see if we can get those submitted and get grant money.
I agree.
Steve, do you know if we have to take the Clean Energy Communities pledge as the county first?
I'm not 100% sure. Unfortunately, Tyra's not on the call. I think so, but I'm not sure. Right, we can check on that. Alejandra, maybe you could look into that as well. Okay.
And I think regardless,
Yeah.
it would be good for the county to take a Clean Energy Community pledge. So maybe this committee passes another motion requesting that the Board of Supervisors pledge for the Clean Energies community, and that way it could get on the July Board of Supervisors agenda.
I'll second that.
Yeah, I'm gonna look while we're talking, see if I can pull this up, or maybe someone else can, so I can continue chairing the meeting. Just look up
Yeah.
what is required to Clean Energy Communities.
David, I think there's a very specific resolution for Clean Energy Communities, and I'm happy to send it out. And I think if this committee just passes the motion requesting that the board adopt the Clean Energies Community Resolution, then we can get that resolution prepared for the June county government meeting, subcommittee meeting.
Yes, that's
a good idea.
I think that's the right way to go.
Great. So we have a motion and we have a second. Sorry, Tistria made the motion. Michael, you seconded it? Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you for that comment and that motion. That's great. And we'll get the language on that so we can move that along more formally to the government committee and then to the board. And as you'll see in a moment, we envision a lot of that clean energy work in the scope of work for the summer and beyond for Alejandra. There were some comments in the chat, which I don't want to miss, so I'm going to just pull those up. Let's see. Tara, something to note regarding New York Stretch, unless the county itself manages code enforcement. Okay, that comment was made. The towns individually, though, are eligible for $5,000 incentives. That was made. Alejandra, regarding the education of employees or communities, that Cornell is developing a new cooperative extension to train volunteers for local climate action. There's some information there. That's great. That's helpful. And Jolene is on vacation. And Claudia Kenny is concerned as we rush toward solar, how we can protect productive capacity to produce food on the best ag soils. as global economics shift and climate crisis deepens, our global food system may go through profound shifts. I think that tension and concern is broadly shared, I'll say, and we need to approach solar as a task force with sensitivity in mind to not only agriculture but wildlife and natural resources more broadly, in my opinion. But I don't know if that informs. That comment is helpful. Thank you for making it. I'm not sure it necessarily. It may lead us to pause on some of those issues or not. Maybe embrace them. As we wrap up this part of the discussion and move along, I am searching for a little bit of direction as to how we can move forward. We have certain things that are obvious priorities that are more opportunistic, as we've talked about, like the EV charging and the clean energy work, because there's funding that we can get, and I think that's going to naturally move us in that direction. But as we develop scope of work, we need a framework to doing that. I had, Dan, you mentioned your work with Cornell. I wonder if we can look into whether we can get some facilitation to help us along that path, or we just do it ourselves, perhaps with Tara and Jill assisting us. There's a lot of experience on the task force as it is. So, I think there's a list of potential criteria, as I mentioned, which we could use and develop. And there's also a list of what people believe are priorities or should be our priorities. And what I can do to start is just document that. I mean, we'll have our meeting minutes, but document, here are potential criteria we could use to evaluate actions. And here are areas of focus that were raised on this call. And we can then see at the next meeting if there are gaps and how we begin to add to that list and then prioritize it. We can continue this discussion. That's how I see it moving forward. Do folks have any other ideas or suggestions for how we move this broader conversation around the scope of our work in the coming years, how we move that forward? John, I see your hand up, and Dan, I see you're about to say something. So let's go in that order.
Go ahead. Dan's mouth was open. Go ahead, and then I'll follow.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I'm scratching my head a bit. I'm just thinking that we are now partially funded by the same organization. In effect, we're partially funded by the same organization that's funding this cohorts group that I'm involved in. So we have another meeting today with the lifeboats funded group. And I can bring that up. I mean, it would be wonderful to get a Cornell Cooperative Extension expertise on board, because they've done this many times with many towns. So and there's a lot of ins and outs and, wisdom to be shared. So I can bring that up. I'm not sure where that will go, but I can bring it up.
Yeah, and I was speaking with that group at the Climate Project Lifeboats the other day, and this came up, this idea.
Yeah.
So if you could raise it again today and then see if we should just follow up with Cornell and appropriate people there and see if there's an opportunity. That would be great to work with you on that, Dan.
Okay.
Thanks. I think that makes a lot of sense. Of course, the Tara and Jill provide a great resource, which we will continue to lean on, and we can go to them anytime to help guide us through this process, this scoping process. And John, you have a comment?
Well, I was just sort of wondering, at what point do we want to discuss some of the partnering issues that are that there are a number of people interested in? Tisra mentioned the composting, and a number of towns are interested in that, and Zero Waste Columbia, our loose network, where a number of our people are, some of whom are on climate smart groups, are very interested in finding different ways of doing composting. And at some point, it makes sense to sort of bring those people together within our framework or within the EMC framework to talk about how do we move ahead on some of these priorities. And I think that there's, in addition to the composting and other municipal waste things. There's several other topics, but I don't want the. And I guess my question is, at what point do we want to discuss how do we sort of move ahead on that without going through the formal, process of the CSC, the county CSC doing things? How do we start to move ahead like that in a parallel way and in close coordination with what the county CSC is doing?
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is that those conversations with, I know some of them have happened with Jolene, some early stage conversations about composting, and that group or groups, Zero Waste and others, are continuing those conversations, and we should see how we as a task force can interface with that group and provide support. The one thing that comes, and those conversations should continue. The one thing that comes to mind are there are funding opportunities for some of the actions that fall under the Climate Smart program that may help grease the wheels. It may help provide the basis or the funding for a pilot project that wouldn't happen otherwise. And so that's one very tangible way in which I think this task force could help. Often those funding opportunities require matches. So in any case, there's going to be some sort of commitment, either through private sector support or through the county itself to do these things. And I know that there was the round of the annual DEC. I have this on the agenda later, so we can cover it now briefly. But the DEC Climate Smart Communities Grant Program was announced recently for 2021, and there are a list of there's up to $10 million available, grants between $50 and $2 million for implementation projects related to, and there's a list, and I forwarded this to folks, but I'll forward it again if you need it. Let me just see if I can share my screen real quick. I have two screens up, so I'm not sure this is going to work, but no. Anyway, one of the items is facilitating food scraps recycling at municipal facilities, reducing landfill methane leakage. So clearly, and every year they specify, DEC specifies a certain number of kind of areas for grant funding. So it's not always open to any action. Those are prioritized. So those grants applications are due July 30th. There's a lot of work that would have to happen between now and then to get a grant in. But John, I would recommend, as someone who's active in this area, taking the lead and the initiative to look into that grant mechanism, look at what's required, see if there's a match required, and start having some conversations to develop more of a plan. Talk with Jolene, see if there is any opportunity for some match, and maybe you can apply and we can help you. If you've done some of that preliminary work, we can help you with the grant. It'd be great to have folks who are interested in particular things kind of tee up those things with a little bit more background and information. But I would look at that grant program. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts on that or this idea of the annual grants. It might be a little early for us this year to get in there. But Steve, I don't know, anyone has experience with that?
Well, yeah, I think it might be a little premature to try to do it at this point. But what I was going to suggest in general is we have Alejandra for a couple months, and why not have her do an assessment of what the low-hanging fruit is and what our priorities could be on our road to bronze. She has experience in this program already, and I think it would be good to evaluate, with the county officials involved, what we've talked about already here in terms of the programs that have been implemented, et cetera, and come up with priorities that we could vote on, I guess, in the next meeting.
Yeah, that's great. Let me pull up. Now we'll shift to the next item. Thank you for that transition, Steve.
Good segue there.
Yeah, it's a good segue. I'll pull
David,
up.
can I say
Let me
just
try this.
can I say just one more thing before we segue?
Of course.
So I think also talking about collaborations, and part of the county task force was to support the local town task forces. Maybe at some point in the summer, hopefully outside, we could invite the chair of each town task force and any task force members that want to come, and either this whole committee or, you know, David and a few others from this committee can really have like a listening session with the town's task forces to be like, how can we support your efforts? What is it you want to collaborate with neighboring towns or countywide on? I think it would be good to have that sort of open listening session with the towns.
I think that's a great idea. That's fantastic. So let's do that. Let's aim for sometime later this summer, inviting.
I'm happy to take on coordinating that, David. I feel like a lot of work is going your way, so I'll start coordinating that if the task force is open to it.
That's music to my ears. But that's great. Thank you. I think it's a great idea. Does anyone have any concerns about that, or any other comments on that as a way of gathering more information as to how we can be most helpful?
Sounds good.
Okay. Everyone's got thumbs up. Let me share again. Let me see if this works now. All right. Which screen are you looking at is the question. Hold on. Okay, what do you see here?
Nothing yet.
Oh.
Black.
I'm seeing a screen of you looking at us.
Well, that's the normal one. Yeah.
Yeah, the House of Cards. I for some reason, I think it's because I have two screens up. So let me see if this, hold on a sec. If I move this over here. How about now?
Good.
Yep.
Hey, that worked. That's great. Okay. So this is what we drew up, and this is what we submitted to the county, and it really covers bullet 1 and 2, or area 1 and 2, covers what Steve just mentioned, which is a comprehensive review of historical actions and a roadmap to bronze. That, I think, will be incredibly informative as we go about trying to prioritize our efforts in our broader scope of work. And I would really like to see Alejandra working, on this area. You can see kind of how it's laid out, and that's a lot of work. That will take a substantial amount of her time, I'm sure. And so then the question is, what else, if anything, can she work on in the clean energy work? Which I think the obvious is what we just talked about, which is supporting through research, data collection, the EV charging and fleets information that Supervisor Knott was asking about in terms of demand and also potential funding, and just coming up with some analysis and some recommendation moving forward. Tiskria, your hand is up. I can just see it behind my Word doc.
Yeah, my hand's always up. Sorry, I'm a mouthy one.
No, I like it.
So I think that's a great place for her to start, because I think until we have the roadmap, it's hard to say what actions make the most sense. For example, if we already have the points from historical actions for the things that the free store and the bike recycling program would fall under, not that we shouldn't still do them, but we need to make sure then that we're focusing our energy on points in other areas. So I really think it's a heavy lift, and will take her at least a month or two, maybe longer, to just go through and work with Supervisor Knott and others on what have we already done, how do we get those points, submitting for the actual points, creating the roadmap to bronze, and then this task force can have a much better kind of map in front of us of, okay, we've got points in these areas, but we don't have what are some low-hanging fruits in these areas we can focus on to get some of those points. So I think that's a great, it's already been approved by the board. It's a great starting point. And I feel like until we have that, other than things like the EV charging station or meeting with the, other town task forces or, adopting the Clean Energies Community pledge, I think it's hard for us as a task force to know what our next step should be without road. So I really feel strongly that really, I don't want to divide her attention in 27 different departments. So I feel strongly, and really her focus is historically, what have we done? Let's get the points submitted. Let's get the points in place. Let's create the roadmap of where we want to go from here. And then as a committee, we can come together and be like, okay, now what are those next steps that we want board approval for?
Yeah.
Yep.
Any other comments?
Sounds good.
Alejandro, do you have any thoughts or comments? We talked about this last week, so it's not, you don't have to add anything if there's nothing additional, but. All right. Well, this is what we're gonna, this is the path we're heading down, which I think will be very informative. If we combine it with a listening session to really hear what our town partners need and how we might be able to provide them support or work on actions that are outside the scope of the county but are within the scope of the towns through those partnerships, then I think we'll get a lot of really useful information there. Yeah, so this seems like a good structure. Please send me your any kind of comments or recommendations that you had for this discussion that we just had on the priorities and any other thoughts. And I will synthesize that, even though it's a very early to be prioritizing what we're working on. It's important to just track. Important, I think, for me certainly to see where people are at and what priorities they're thinking about. So just send that to me, and it won't get kind of lost in the ether. We'll be able to create a Google Doc and keep track of that, and we can just kind of iterate on that.
And David, I really like your idea, even if right now it doesn't have priorities that we assign to it. I like your idea of having columns. Does this force anyone to do anything? Yes or no? Does this provide a tangible benefit to residents in the next 6 to 12 months? Yes or no? Does this provide a tangible savings to the county? Just having some categories that, again, we don't need to assign, what carries more weight than others just yet, but just to have an idea of what boxes does this action check? I like that idea.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll start tracking that and putting that down on paper so we have it, and then we can see how we want to use it to score or rank later on. Okay, great. So, the next thing on the agenda. Can you still see my screen here with the email here and this?
With your calendar.
Oh, it's okay. I'm on the.
We
sorry.
just see your calendar. You're going to the vet at 1 o'clock on the 25th.
Thanks. Oh. The problem here is I have two screens, and that's the issue. Okay. Let me move the job description coordinator position on here. Let me pull that up. Of course, it's on the other screen, which doesn't help anyone. Okay. So where are we at with this? Can everyone see that now?
Yep.
Okay. We've had discussions with CLC, or I have, in the last couple of weeks. We have also with the principal folks at Lifeboats. That's Paige Ruane, Matt Stinchcombe, and Bob Dandrew. And as a quick aside, they've, and we need to vote on this before we lose our quorum, but Matt has offered to join the task force. And I think that's a really valuable linkage to have them actually have a seat on the task force. CLC already has a representative on the task force, but given the part that's forming here, I think that would be great. So I'd like to, before we forget, make a motion for Matt Stinchcomb of Partners for Climate Action Hudson Valley to join the task force. This is a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to add them or add him individually. John, did you have a comment, or were you going to second?
I would so move.
Okay, great. John is moving. Any second for that?
Second.
Great. Michael, and all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So we will make sure that we move that forward as well. So in our discussions, we developed this job description. I sent an email yesterday, so I wanted to see if there were any comments or anything that folks felt was missing. Now, one of the things that came up in our discussion was it's a long list of responsibilities and duties, and so this could be daunting, and it's a long list of qualifications, so this would be hard to fill. But I've done many job descriptions and recruitment before, and I'm comfortable with this because it's not saying we're going to ask this person to do everything or be everything, but this is a way in which we can provide the kind of universe of tasks and responsibilities that they will be working on, some of, and at any given point in time. And then, of course, it will be refined by the scope of work that we develop as a task force. It gets approved by the Board of Supervisors. So that's kind of why it's a long, comprehensive list. And then the qualifications, we may not find someone who rings every bell here, but we'll see what we can come up with. So I'll just open it up if anyone else has other comments, and then I'll describe the kind of process that we're envisioning moving forward to getting to a point where we can actually be able to advertise for this position, which we're not at now, obviously.
I had a question. Do we need to put the time frame, the 2-year time frame in this job description, or no?
Yeah, it's be wise to do that. I mean, it certainly would come up in our discussions with candidates, so we might as well put that in here. I mean, this gets to a broader discussion, which is something that has come up with both the funders. If there's an appetite to support this, but not an appetite to support it in perpetuity. And there's a strong feeling that this is a responsibility of the municipality, that while we recognize the county is not prepared to do this now, we do hope that at some point in time in the near future, ideally after 2 years, this position will have demonstrated its value sufficiently where the county can consider creating a position, perhaps with some outside support to help fund that position, but that position becomes something that is internal to the county operations over time. Now, obviously, that's a big discussion, and we have no control over that. But in terms of expectations, I think we want to communicate that in the memorandum of understanding. It doesn't belong in the job description, but in the MOU and in discussions with the county to get support and ultimately approval to move forward with this. It's not a requirement of the funding. No one is restricting it, saying, well, you have to commit to do this, otherwise we won't give the funding. Not at all, but it is an expectation and a hope of the funders that it will evolve in that direction. And I'll say one other expand the review a bit, we ideally, both CLC, both CLC and lifeboats have said that they would commit the funding, and so either one of them, CLC is the lead sponsor. So the person is hired through CLC, but we would like to structure this in a way where the position is housed at the county offices, meaning that we would like to ask the county to provide an office space if the offices are open, or to the extent that they're open, the person could still obviously be working remotely, as is consistent with the work kind of protocols at the county level and at CLC. But that's another point which I think it's another ask. Is there space, and can the county support that so that there's someone, and if not, then there are other ways of doing it. But that would be ideal. So I'll just throw those kind of structural ideas out that's come up in the conversations. I think having the person at the county offices would be really important to making this person at the service of the county and not some external force or some external resource that no one knows. It would allow that person to get to know people individually and work with people directly. It would also avoid any concerns that might arise about how an outside organization that an individual in the community may like or may not like is, having undue influence over this county task force. Those are the ideas. So does anyone have any comments on the job description, or more broadly on the these ideas of how we envision this position developing within the county, or and I have no idea whether the county would be open to having someone, or it's even feasible to have someone sitting there in the county office, but we have that discussion. Michael.
Well, certainly the placement of somebody in a county office would, as you mentioned, facilitate interaction with all the people that they need to. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary, especially now that we've gotten used to working remotely. There's a whole lot of contact and meetings and so forth that I think people will continue to have remotely. But in any event, I think the responsibilities and job description is quite ambitious, but I don't disagree with the aspiration of it, and we'll put out the word and see who applies, and try and come close to that aspiration. But as we all know, you'll get who you get. Whoever does, think it is something they want to do.
Yeah, and the other. Sorry, was there another comment, Steve? Do you have a comment?
No, sorry.
That's okay. And the other point of discussion has been around the salary, and Troy reached out to, I believe it was Orange County coordinator for the same role in that county, and they were at or it may not have been that county, but they're in that position is in the mid 80s salary wise, but that person has quite a bit of experience. And then looking at county salaries in the county, Troy thinks that low to mid 70s for a person that we're looking for at this caliber is a reasonable salary. So that's kind of that's where we're at with our funding source. We envision use for salary and benefits, and having ideally having the indirect costs be borne by the sponsoring organization, so that we can use the full 85 for salary and benefits. We also recognize there's no project budget, which is an issue. There's no money for documentation or meetings or travel or any incidentals. So we, I think, need to carve out some of that 85 for maybe $5,000 or so for an expense account of sorts. So that's where we're at now. I think we need to share this MOU before we're ready to and share this job description before we're ready to make a motion to move these documents formally. I think I'd like to have some further conversations with some of the supervisors to see where we're at with this and try to get this, especially the MOU, fleshed out a little bit more, and then come back to the task force with the results of those discussions, because we haven't had that input yet, and I don't think it would be right for us to move forward with something that hasn't benefited from the input of the county officials, to make sure we're on the right track and make sure that this is consistent with how they're thinking about this position and it would be workable. I don't know if Supervisor Collins or Tistria, if you're still on, I don't see you. If you have any thoughts on process from here, if that's a good idea, or there's something I'm missing.
Yeah, I don't think it would hurt to review that position, both through county legal and get back to you on that.
Okay. Well, that's what I'll do then. And if you have any other questions or comments or suggestions for either document, please don't hesitate to email me. So we just have a couple other items, which one of them we've covered, which is there's this DEC funding, which is, I'm sure, premature, but take a look at that email that I sent if you're so inclined, and if any ideas pop up, let me know, and we could try to focus some attention on that. But that is a tight timeline, and I don't think that's going to be a viable option for us this year, but hopefully by next year it will be. The Clean Energy Communities funding, I think, is much more realistic in the short term as the first source of kind of general funds. And there's also another DEC grant mechanism for supporting organizations that support climate smart initiatives, which has a similar timeline, but that grant could potentially offset or extend. It could go toward this coordinator position, the way I'm reading it. And so I'm going to attend a meeting or a webinar next week to see if that is true, and if there's an opportunity for us to apply for some of that funding to offset some of the commitments, or like I said, extend out the 85 for 2 years, see if that would help add to the pot for this position and allow us to have funding for a longer period of time. So the last item that I have is there's been a suggestion that our monthly meeting, which comes at the end of the month, is inconsistent with the calendar of the Board of Supervisors. Tistria, tell me again what the schedule is. Tell us again.
So county government meets towards the end of the month. So like they met May 20th, which is what would get it on the full board agenda for the June meeting. So we're meeting now a week after county government, which means from the resolutions we adopted this meeting aren't going to get to county government till June 17th, which means they're not going to get to the board till July. So if we met like 2 weeks before this, if we kept the same whatever we ended up picking. We picked the last Thursday. So if we did like the second Thursday from 10 to 12 instead of the fourth Thursday, we would then be a week before county government, which means anything, let's just say that we were in May meeting the week before county government, we would be getting on the June full board agenda, which then means we're only waiting 3 weeks as opposed to a month and 3 weeks. And I think that's pretty important. And I'm sorry I didn't catch that before when we were making the standing meeting date. But if Thursdays from 10 to 12 work for people, my suggestion would be to switch it to the second Thursday of the month, which will be after the full board. So the full board meeting is the second Wednesday. So it will be after the full board meeting. So we'll have the results of whatever was sent prior. But it is still a good 2 weeks before the county government committee meeting.
Yeah, I mean, that makes great sense. The question is, does that work? And does that schedule work for people? The second Thursday, we could do a different day of, and the more specific question is, should we meet in 2 weeks? Or should we go 6 weeks or so before we have our next meeting? And I personally think that given where we're at with our development, that we should, and as much as I really think these meetings have been very productive, I think we could benefit from a 6-week stretch to consolidate some of the work that's been done and some of the let Alejandra get started and have several weeks under her belt. And so we could have a really productive meeting in July. But maybe what we do is we have a short meeting in June where we can cover any kind of business, and if there are any items that we need to move forward or respond to, we can do that. So we call it for maybe an hour, but it could be less. And then we try to hold our standing time for the 2-hour period. Today we're going to break early, and hopefully we'll do that most of the time unless we are really getting into something. So how do folks feel about the second Thursday of every month?
Works for me.
Opposed to that?
I have a standing land protection team meeting the morning of the second Thursday of the month. So I can, it'd be hard to change that because there are a lot of people involved in that. I don't know if there's a way of polling to figure out if there's another potential date that would work, or would the first Thursday of the month not work? Would that be,
The first
not
Thursday,
as convenient?
the first Thursday could work too.
What's that, Tistria?
The first Thursday could work too. You won't have the results of the full board meeting. Although, like when I look at a month like July, you're not going to anyway because the first is a Thursday. So we would be meeting July 8th and the full board meets on the 14th. But if we went to the third Thursday, that's the same date as the county government meeting, which doesn't give us enough time to get anything on their agenda. So have to know the outcome of the full board before our next meeting, but there may be some things that we're waiting to see. I will say this, typically if it passes through county government, it is most likely going to pass through the full board. In my, year and a half, if ever, but certainly rarely, that I've seen something pass through the subcommittee and then not get the vote of the full board. Patrice, don't you agree with that? That typically once it passes through the subcommittee, it's pretty good. So I think the first Thursday would be fine, knowing at that point we will know that it's passed. A pretty safe assumption that it's going to pass the full board when we have our meeting for discussion. Does the first Thursday work for people?
From my perspective, the first Thursday would be better because if I'm preparing items for submission to Kelly to be on the agenda, they require the week before the meeting. So I may or may not have enough time to process everything to get it to Kelly the following morning. It's just a logistics thing. I mean, it's likely that I could do it, but there's some times where it wouldn't be possible. And then it would be, again, the rushing to try and get it added to the agenda after the deadline for staff, for department heads to submit to the board. So,
yeah.
I mean, if that's the way you want to handle it, I'm fine. We can do that, get it on late. But
I think it's better to be
logistically,
more prepared. So does
Yeah.
the first
Generally
Thursday
speaking,
from 10
it'll
to
work for
12
me.
not, does the first Thursday from 10 to 12 not work for anyone? I'll make a motion that we move our standing meeting to the first Thursday of each month from 10 to 12.
Great.
I'll second it.
Okay. Second. And anyone opposed? Great. All in favor? Just to make
Aye.
sure we dot the i's. Great.
Aye.
So thank you. The motion passes that our next meeting would be on the 3rd. But what I'd like to do, it's very soon, it's next week. I'd like to say that if we need to just hold that time, and if we need 10 or 15 minutes to do anything, any kind of business, not a discussion, it'll be too early, then I may call for a meeting just to get something done. I don't expect that we're going to meet next Thursday. So, but we will meet the first week of July again, unless there's something very urgent next week. That will be great. That'll give us a chance to start working with Alejandra and, like I said, get some of this other, the great feedback we've gotten, get some of that kind of down on paper and allow us to organize ourselves. Thank you. Is there anything else?
Hey, David, can I ask a question? One, can someone send out a new link for the standing first Thursday so it shows up in calendar once we accept it? And second, I do apologize. I cut out for about 10 minutes. Did we vote on the MOU and the job description for the paid oversight position?
No, we didn't. And please tell us what you think. But my thought is we haven't yet, especially on the MOU, we haven't yet had any kind of feedback, informal feedback from the legal department supervisors that are involved in, what we're doing. We have had that kind of discussion with the other parties to the MOU, and I think it's only proper that we have some of those discussions in the next few weeks before we as a task force decide to vote on a document and send it off formally to the government committee. I think that would make it run a lot smoother and lead to less time, ultimately, everyone spending on it. So if you agree with that, I would really appreciate continuing to work with you, Supervisor Collins, not. How does that sound?
So I defer on the trees because in my experience, typically the draft MOU would go to the county attorney because it was being sent to county government for their June meeting. So typically I think that process would happen by this task force voting the proposed one through. Then it would go to the county attorney to get to county government, but Patrice probably knows better than I do. Would we send it, Patrice, to the county attorney for review and edits before this subcommittee would vote it through to then get it to county government at their July meeting?
If this was voted upon and then put on and for the agenda for county government, you may or may not have the attorney's review conducted within that time frame. So may not have the county government meeting is held.
Okay.
Sometimes they're really quickly. It just depends. But when reviews of contracts and things like this, sometimes it takes a little bit more time. They could turn around in a day, but it could take a couple of weeks. So
what if, David, what if I made a motion to send the proposed MOU and job description to the county attorney, and then, the time frame and process from there will be dependent on how long he takes to review it and come back to us?
I guess
at least start that process.
Well, we can certainly do that. My thinking is, as a lawyer and when in discussions on contracts, things of this nature, they often can get bogged down when the parties haven't had a chance without the lawyers first having to hash out the principles and the agreement that we're trying to achieve. And I always like starting with negotiating in kind of common sense terms. Well, what is our ideal agreement here? What is the relationship? What are we trying to achieve? And then we can craft a draft, which this is not there yet, because this only benefits from the input from 2 of the 3 parties, but not the government part, which is the most essential. And I don't know who that negotiating partner is.
Well, that was my question. What would be the next step? Who would be the group on this end that's going to then do that review? Do we want to establish that at least? I just feel like we should have some next step.
I agree. What I'd like to do is I could do this. I'll take this on myself, or and have this conversation, or if others would like to, 1 or 2 people would like to join me, I would like to have a meeting and a conversation with, at the very least, the supervisors that are part of the task force, and get their input as to what they think is most suitable, workable, kind of hear out any kind of objections or concerns, so we can smooth through some of these things and figure out what makes the most sense. And then I would be happy to put that into the draft and have us vote on it. But we're not there yet. Maybe we can do that by next Tuesday, and I can email out a revised draft, and we can simply meet for 5 minutes, or maybe it requires a little discussion, a little bit longer, and vote on it next Tuesday, in which case we could get it out the door so it can get that legal review. I don't know if that may or may not work. There's a holiday weekend, and it might be hard to convene a meeting before then and do that, but we could try.
Okay, so maybe the next step is you send an email out to Supervisor Knott, myself, Supervisor Collins, and Supervisor Adams, and we just have a Zoom meeting to review it and then take it from there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if it can happen before Thursday, great. If it can't, then we'll do it as soon as we can, and we'll put it on the agenda for the next meeting. I always envision this. We want to do this right. This is it's a novel. This happens. NGOs work with government agencies all the time. People get seconded to government agencies through. This is not a novel concept in any way. And in fact, Troy experience with this type of thing with TNC, his previous employer. So it's not exotic, but it's not a typical thing for a lot of folks in government. They may or may not have come across it. And I just would like to make sure that we do this in a way that's as methodical as possible. I'm as eager to out and fill this position. It's a great opportunity, but I always envision this would be something that we'll be kind of advertising toward the end of the summer. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it. And I think that's a reasonable timeline. And if we can hire someone, in the fall or by the end of the year, that would be tremendous. And that will be a lot of progress. It may seem too slow to some, and we can try to push faster. There's a lot of urgency, obviously, but I think that's a reasonable and realistic time frame.
Great. Thanks, David. And I just had one more question of Patrice. For any of the resolutions that were passed, Patrice, the clean energy one, I will get you the wording because it's very specific. But for the other resolutions, which were the support of the EV charging station, are you able to just kind of draft, a resolution in support to get it to county government? Is there anything else you need from us to get all the motions and resolutions that passed here over to county government, with the exception of the clean energy's wording?
No, if there's specific wording that you want included, then I'd appreciate you sending that along. That would be helpful.
On the EV charging one, I took notes, and I'll do that, and I'll CC you to make sure we capture it correctly, and we'll help you out with that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And
was there any other motion? There was one more motion too. The clean energy communities, the EV charging station. Wasn't there another one?
To add Matt Finch.
Add the Matt
as a member of the task force.
Got it.
That's straight. But I'll also I'll send you his title and organizational, just so you have the exact one from Matt.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because I have a standard resolution for the amending that resolution for the membership of the task force.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. we had a good meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your support and contributions. Have a great weekend. It's going to be cold.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you for all your work.
Weather.
I'll make
Motion to seconded by
Second.
Steve. All in favor?
aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Great.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you all.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. How do I get out of here?